Hey, everybody. Welcome in. Brand new week, brand new episode, Guerilla Sports Off Ice. I'm Jesse Montano, going to be joined by Meghan Angley in just a moment. We got a ton of fun stuff to get into on today's show. But of course, I do want to remind you guys about our great partners over at Trusted American Mortgage. Head on over, trustedamerican.com. They want to help you lower your interest rate, get a better monthly payment, especially now that we're heading into the summer months. Put that money to work for you. Better take a vacation. Go to trustedamerican.com right now. See how much money they can help you start saving today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. I'll just finish this story for you on the air. So I was like, oh, shit. And I appreciated that she told me that. I was like, I'd rather you tell me that than allow me to just continue walking around doing that.
No, that's really scary to think about, though, because you've been saying it for enough time that you've probably built a habit of saying it. Correct. Now you have to break it.
I caught myself yesterday. How's it going, everybody? I'm Jesse Montano. That's Meghan Angley. We were in the middle of a funny story during the intro, so I just had to finish it. Meghan, we are officially into the Stanley Cup Final here, which means we're well into the offseason for 30 NHL teams. We got a lot to get into, including some rumors that are starting to swirl around with the Avs and a potential 2C. We're going to talk about the Stanley Cup Final. The Avs made a signing over the weekend. I think you're running a secret underground campaign. But before we get into all that, Meghan, as always, how are you? How was your weekend?
It was good. I went down to Colorado Springs, got some stuff squared away at the DMV, and it was a really painless experience.
All right. Nice.
Yeah, it was really quick in and out. Got my registration up to date, license plate switched out. So I am roadworthy once again.
Nice. That is always nice. Your tag expires, especially for so my tag always expires right at the end of the year, right around Christmas. So you have everything with the holidays, and then we come out and you get right into the a busy season, especially this last year. There was kind of that big rush before trade deadline. So it's just it's really busy. And yeah, sometimes my car gets illegal because my tag will expire. And it's just always nice to walk out of there with a fresh sticker and be like, I'm good. No one get mad at me.
I am good.
I am good. Let me ask you how you feel about I've always felt like Colorado Springs, different people down there in Colorado Springs. They're very different from Denver people.
This is so loaded, but yes, in a lot of different ways, there's layers to it.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah. I'm just because you go to the Springs often, and I've just never officially asked you about what you think about Springs people.
I'm sure you've heard of code switching, and it's just generally depending on different places, you kind of switch up your tone. I actually won't go into too much detail here, but I even code switch in Loveland. And so I have different mannerisms, different ways of speaking. Loveland, Colorado Springs, Denver. Nobody knows who they're dealing with. Who is the real Meghan?
So I've a ton of my extended family lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And if I get on the phone with a relative, my wife will give me a hard time because you change up your vibe just a little bit.
You change up your vibe. And honestly, even hockey, in the world of hockey, there's a fully different. Sometimes I just say words with a little bit of a Canadian accent, and I need to be more aware of that because that's not real. That's not authentic to me.
No, it is. It's authentic.
I'm just around a lot of you guys.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up, though, because it is such a thing. We're I wouldn't talk to someone from Denver the same way I talk to someone from Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And the same way I wouldn't talk to a football person the same way I talk to a hockey person. There's, how people are always oh yeah, you have work me. And then when I go home, I have so many. I've actually had this conversation with someone before. Think of all the different people that know a certain version of you.
Yeah.
Where it's yeah, that's not me.
I will say this is probably the most real version of me. The in hockey world Meghan is probably most authentic.
Especially when Chloe and I will talk every now and then about we can tell when you really feel passionately about something. And I mean that in the best way possible, because the authentic Meg Daddy shows up.
Meg Daddy is here.
All right, should we get into some of this stuff? Should
Yes,
we talk about
let's
hockey
talk
at all
about
today?
Brock Nelson.
I thought you were going to say the Broncos. I was like, all right. Yeah, Megan, this is something that you and I had actually discussed earlier last week, just the two of us, off air. And then I believe it was Dave Pagnetta had put it out first saying that, hey, there sounds like there is some mutual interest. And Megan, I am able to confirm that. I have spoken with some sources who have said the same thing, that there may actually be a decently likely path Brock Nelson and the Colorado Avalanche are able to come to terms on an extension to keep him here. There's a lot that I think we're going to get into here. But for me, one of the things, and this is what you and I were discussing last week, was when I was talking to someone that I said, yeah, and then Brock, sounds like he probably just wants to go back to Minnesota. And I was told, not so fast. And what I was told was, I don't believe that to be the case. Sounds like the door is open for Brock Nelson to stay in Colorado. We had discussed that he had been getting better. You're just kind of broad strokes thoughts before we get into some of the more specifics on it. If the Avs were to bring Brock Nelson back.
Before the report about him potentially having interest in returning home emerged, and I was
home to Minnesota.
Yes. And I was left just with my own feelings about Brock Nelson staying in Colorado. I was pretty neutral to it. I was open to it if the price made sense. His last contract, the 6x6, felt a little bit rich. So it'd have to be something entirely different that makes sense for the stage he's at in his career currently and just kind of the gamble that exists moving forward. And I was open to it, though, because I think to his regular season returns, following the trade deadline, the fit didn't as immediately jump off the page as, say, Casey Mittelstadt and his immediate fit with the Avs following the deadline. And even Charlie Coyle, I think, started to find his rhythm on that third line quicker than Brock Nelson did on the second line in the regular season. But you started to see him building towards just finding some chemistry with players like Vanachushkin. And there are aspects of his game that don't translate to production, but that I really like, that make a lot of sense. He's a very responsible player, very smart defensively. Just recall some plays through the neutral zone or some stick plays in his own end that avoided more dire consequences that made me think, I kind of like Brock Nelson. He was good in the faceoff dot. And so the lack of production, though, persisted into the playoffs. Obviously, when there was a point of emphasis, it was needed most. It was an issue across the whole team. So you got away with it a little bit in the regular season, not seeing the finish, but it started to become a bigger issue in the playoffs. And what I was left feeling is, with a full season of runway, what would Brock Nelson look like in Colorado? And I talked about building brotherhood too as a necessary ingredient for just that extra motivation that pushes you when you are in the battle with your boys, if you will. And I think that would also build over the course of a regular season, because I think he's a great teammate, a really mature and experienced player, but just didn't have time to build the brotherhood aspect just in that short window. So I think in a full season, I look at even a player like Jonathan Drouin, who didn't immediately work in Colorado, and it did take that full length of the season to see what he was capable of. And so with Brock Nelson, in the early return, one, I see that his possession numbers 5v5 actually were better here than they were in New York, to start that year. And I think there's been a trend of maybe execution being a little bit of an issue at this stage of his career, but still an otherwise responsible player. And I see that boost in production, like with the Corsi 4 5v5. And I think in an Avs system that is such a strong possession team with opportunities alongside a player like Vanachushkin, I do think it could only get better from here. So I don't hate it. I think he's a responsible player and a really safe bet, because Casey Mittelstadt is obviously the other side of this, where you had a player who immediately fit in Colorado until he didn't. And we saw the other side of that is maybe the immediate fit isn't what you need to take hold. You need the long-term fit, and you maybe need the safer bet then in that case. Casey Mittelstadt, probably higher ceiling and a longer opportunity for him to be good compared to a player like Brock Nelson. But because that high ceiling, the floor was a little bit lower. And I think the floor with a player like Brock Nelson is higher because of that experience, that maturity.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit in a moment about what you're just kind of alluding to there about like, all right, well, the long term of it and, this being a safer gamble. I want to talk about that and like what kind of the alternatives are. But yeah, I think there was understandably so, rightfully so. There was a lot of talk about Brock Nelson's production or lack thereof from trade deadline through the end of the playoffs. And I don't think there was enough appreciation for what he did away from the puck to what you're talking about. But a couple things with this. One, I think what we saw over the course of those 7 games, especially the last 5, where he was skating with Gabe Landeskog and Val Nichushkin, there was the real makings of like a problematic line for other teams. Like
definitely,
those 3 really seemed to work well together. They complemented each other well. Brock Nelson's a 30 goal scorer. He can be your trigger guy, but is still willing to work hard away from the puck. The other thing to keep in mind, like this is a guy very much on the radar for Team USA's Olympic team based off of his entire body of work and his career. He was just on their, the Team USA roster for 4 nations. So I know it didn't, translate perfectly here in Colorado with the offensive side of the game. There's a long track record that says that this is a player who is an offensively gifted player who can put the puck in the back of the net. And I just think that taking what he's done over the course of his career and even this past season, combined with what we started to see as he really settled in and got put on that line with Gabe Landeskog and Val Nichushkin, that to me is what, to your point, of makes me look at it and go, yeah, okay. I'm moving from neutral to, I think this could be a good thing. And I think this could fit really well. Especially at the right term length, especially at the right dollar length. Now let's talk about, okay, so you brought in Casey Middlestat. That one was a little bit more of a gamble. Let's see if he can grow into this. Let's see if he can, reach for new heights and hit that ceiling. And then alternatively, like, you kind of look out. I saw someone mention Marco Rossi in the chat. Like there's some stuff out there, but if you're not going the Brock Nelson route, you're probably talking trade, and you probably are taking a little bit more of a gamble on let's see if this works out. And you're going to potentially find yourself in a room where it doesn't work and you just lost an asset, an asset that was able to fetch you what you thought could be a second line center. Brock Nelson, if you went out and got Brock Nelson on, I don't know, 3 years, 4.5 to 5, I think you feel really good about that. And you say, hey, that's our second line center, set and forget. We know he can be at least that.
It's tough because my just projection for what he could command is kind of 5 being the floor. And so I'm still entertaining that as a realistic possibility, with 7.5 being the ceiling.
Yeah.
And that would be an option outside of Colorado at that point. Yeah. They just can't entertain that. You look at the cap space that's still available, with the wonderful problem of now having Gabriel Landeskog's contract back on the books. They're a little limited then in what they can do to solve this position. And we've kind of talked about different ways in which they might consider moving out secondary, but also large pieces to revamp that top 6. And even still, without considering that, they're going to need a little bit of a team-friendly deal. And so that's why, if there's mutual interest, as is being reported, I'm not closing that door. But I do think it has to be around the 5 AAV range, or 6, which would just kind of copy-paste the AAV of his last contract. And you obviously can't commit to too much term past that.
I think 3 years would probably be my max.
3 would be my max. So I'm in 1 to 3 for the year range, and between 5 and 6 for the average value for each year.
Now, I will, not to cut you off, but if you went 4 years to keep the AAV at 5, okay, I could live with it.
I could live with it. Still a 33-year-old player, so it's not quite the room that we're going to be in when we discuss Jonathan Toews here in a moment. But Brock Nelson, I agree. I don't think that we saw the full extent of what he's capable of. And when I look at what he was building up towards, it wasn't streaky the way that Casey Middlestat became, hot, cold. It just felt like it was gradually building. It didn't feel like Brock Nelson's game was taking huge steps backwards. It just felt like it was maybe a little bit stagnant at points, but still in a good and responsible place. You just wanted to see him impact the game even more. And I think, too, there's a little bit of a different role that he had to adapt to in Colorado, but still with really great talent around him. And with Landeskog and what was teased in the playoffs, I think you're right to point out that it's something to get excited on if that is the reality we're in next year with Brock Nelson back as the 2C.
This guy played his entire career in one organization that plays a very specific way. I think there should be a little bit of allowance for him to stumble around a little bit getting to Colorado. Like we even, Megan, you and I would talk, like when we would speak with him in the locker room, he never seemed, upset or uneasy, but it did seem like it took him a while to feel settled. His family didn't come out here for a long time after. If he went into, this offseason knowing I'm here for the next 3 years, I think a lot of people will be really pleasantly surprised out of what the Avs could get out of Brock Nelson next year. And again, to me, this would signal we are going to try to run it back as closely as we can approach. And again, I love the call out that you made about the, losing as a group, winning as a group, losing as a group. Man, it would be such a shame to go through such a heartbreaking loss and moment like that, only to see Brock Nelson, just leave and go somewhere else. And then you have to have someone else that plugs in there who didn't go through that with you as a group. I think that's a great call out by you that if you bring Brock Nelson back, okay, everyone who was hurt by this, we're all in it together still.
You know what's interesting too? We haven't even mentioned it, and I'm glad we haven't, but we should address it now. The sunk cost fallacy. And well, you look at giving up a first and Cal Ritchie and Oliver Shellington. I'm just kidding. For this player. And so, there's that. Well, is that part of the incentive then to keep Brock Nelson? And we haven't brought it up because I don't think that's what's being factored into this, though. It's weighing in the back of my mind what the Avs have given up as a whole, honestly, through this point. Cal Ritchie, a prospect we were both high on, but even still, that's not factoring into my motives to re-sign Brock Nelson. Going back to his play away from the puck, he was 18th in the league in takeaways. His size and length down the middle, what it added, I think we didn't get to see the full extent of it in the playoffs, but the Avs became tougher to play against because of how they solidified themselves down the middle, and Brock Nelson was a part of that.
Well, and again, that line with Nelson, Landeskog, and Nichushkin, to me, I look at that as the makings of the start of a true shutdown. You could match that line against other teams' top lines and feel pretty good about it. And to the topic of the sunk cost, I'm with you. I don't think that the Avs are necessarily making a decision based on that, but I do think you should look at it if you're them, they're probably looking at it from the standpoint of we already spent the assets to get this guy. We've got the negotiating rights. Let's see if we can make something out of this.
Right.
This is a guy that we would have been on in free agency anyways. We've got the chance to talk to him first. If he's interested in staying, let's see if we can make something happen. And if you can keep him from going to a division rival, double check mark.
Does that matter? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I've brought it up many times before. The 2010s era Avalanche were defined by what at one point looked like, an elite core in the making. Matt Duchene, Ryan O'Reilly, Paul Stastny, young Tyson Barrie. Then you had Gabe Landeskog, Eric Johnson. Two of those players have remained with Colorado. All the other players I just listed, and then you can add Mikko Rantanen onto that, have all ended up back in the division. All of them. At one point or another. For Matt Duchene, he's ended up back in the... Matt Duchene has now played on half of the Central Division teams. Paul Stastny played on half the Central Division teams. There is a crazy run here that the Avs have been on. Matt Duchene traded out east, ends up back in the Central on free agency. Ryan O'Reilly traded out east, ends up back in the Central. Paul Stastny signed back in the Central. Tyson Barrie, traded out east, signs back in the Central. It's like, what is going on here? Mikko Rantanen, traded out east, signed or traded, then signed back in the Central. Be nice for them just to avoid it even once, maybe.
Even once. Buck that trend.
Megan, there's another name here that as of this morning is officially being tied to the Colorado Avalanche. It's a name you and I texted each other about immediately saying, yep, we're going to have to talk about this. We see this as a potential fit. Jonathan Toews has made it clear to his agent that he wants to make a push to return to the NHL for the 25-26 season. Among a couple other teams, including the Winnipeg Jets, Colorado Avalanche have emerged as an early front runner for the services of Jonathan Toews. To me, you're talking about league min, fourth line. Can this guy still do it? But Megan, what's your interest level in taking a flyer on a guy like Jonathan Toews?
Well, it's not a new name that's been linked to the Avs, so I understand this is a front office that already has seen the fit with Toews in the past. Obviously, at 37 years old or turning 37, there's a lot of risk with a player who's only played 2 seasons in the past 5 years. And the Avs are already accounting for a lot of risk in a player like Landeskog.
Yep.
And that panned out, I think, beyond anyone's expectations, which is great. But with Toews, that's a lot of time to miss. And, even leading up to it, the nature of what has caused him to miss so much time, I think, remains a bit unpredictable. It was chronic immune response syndrome. He seemed to be dealing with a lot then, that wear and tear on his body that I think not so different in the way that Landeskog's return to play was unpredictable. It was unprecedented. This feels a bit unprecedented, uncharted territory to see how an athlete will hold up then in his return to play plan, being a little bit older, seeing his play a bit on the decline while suffering from this in the seasons leading up to him stepping away from the game. It's hard to ignore too. He's a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, 2-time Olympic gold medalist. Like, this is a player with a body of work that speaks for itself, still a beast in the face-off dot. And I think every projection for Jonathan Toews making his return to the league has him as a depth player, in a fourth line capacity. And so when I look at the list of teams that have interest, I see more of a fit on some of those teams than I do the Avs. And that's just because they kind of figured out their fourth line. And don't get me wrong, they always love to have options for their depth. And they always love to have players that surpass expectations. And so maybe guys who were penciled in for a fourth line role end up exceeding that. Because we see in the way Kiviranta was a guy that they kept around as an extra option, maybe played above where he should have been in a third line role. And that was somewhere that the Avs hurt themselves a little bit. And that's part of the whole puzzle too, is they can't have the bottom 6 be everybody that they'd ideally like to be there. That's a kind of a luxury in today's NHL. And I know that even with the cap going up, the Avs just haven't really benefited from the timeline of this happening post the 2022 Cup. It's been really difficult, and maybe we haven't given it enough conversation, just how difficult it has been for the Avs to construct their teams following the 2022 season with respect to the timeline for the cap increases. It's been hard. And so I see a player like Toews, if you're talking league men, being a fourth line player, I'm not saying no to it. I just don't know if, looking at some of the other teams, the Avs make the most sense compared to some of the others. But I'm not saying no to it.
Yeah, I Jack Drury, expecting to still be around this year, barring them moving on, moving him in a deal or something like that. And to your point, they really liked that fourth line of Parker Kelly, Jack Drury, Logan O'Connor. I just look at a guy like Jonathan Toews, and again, we're talking 1 year league minimum. Let's see, because there is a world where he comes back and he maybe can't do it, and he's got to go LTIR, and that's kind of the end. But I look at that as a guy that could come in and rotate in to start. See how it works, not necessarily play every night. And then as he starts to feel better, if he does feel better, look better, well, that's a guy that, maybe you elevate, assuming that there's likely some changes coming to that bottom 6 this summer. in terms of maybe money they're looking to move out. Miles Wood. I don't know. Maybe that's a guy that as injuries happen, he finds a more permanent home on that fourth line. And Logan O'Connor ends up playing with Charlie Coyle and Ross Colton. And you end up with a fourth line of Jack Drury, Jonathan Toews. I wanted to say Devon, Jonathan Toews and Parker. I just think he would be a really interesting option in the bottom of that lineup. Like you said, even before he went out, was still just a master in the dot. And this is a guy that's captained 3 Stanley Cup teams. There is no game or moment that you are going to bring that guy up to that he's going to feel overwhelmed by, hasn't been there before, whatever. And I just think that with where the Avs are at, I think that would be a really fun and interesting ad on the Avs fourth, in the bottom part of their lineup. Who knows? Maybe he comes back and exceeds expectations as well and moves up. I'm not banking on that, but I just think that Jonathan Toews is a really interesting name to have on your radar as someone that I think could be really helpful for the Avs bottom part of the lineup. So it's a name we'll keep an eye on, but
it reminds me of Oliver Shillington in different ways, a player who had missed a big amount of time. And they wanted to find a place for him, and the opportunity, he didn't seize the opportunity. Yeah. So that was part of it. But I would hate to see them run into the same problem of just not having regular games to put Toews in, because that's what a player making his return to hockey needs more than anything. So that's where the fit conversation, maybe other teams have more room to spare, if you will, because of how solidified they made the fourth line. But again, that third line is ripe for opportunity, because that was the one kind of dark spot from the playoffs that is clearly unresolved going into next year.
Well, and I do just think about how many different players the Avs used last year. And I look at that and say, if you could have Jonathan Toews, even on his comeback, as your first guy coming out of the press box when you'll deal with an injury in week 1, I don't think they'd struggle to get him into games at least as many as he needs. I also think this might be a player that, and hey, we've got to keep an eye on this with Gabe Landeskog as well. We may not see 82 games from Gabe Landeskog this year. Just as he ramps himself back up to the wear and tear on this new knee of his of a full 82 game season. That might be the case with Jonathan Toews as well. Winnipeg and Toronto were the other 2 teams that were listed, at least as of this morning, as some of the top contenders for him. I think the Avs can make the argument of, hey, we're the only ones that have won recently. Do you want to win? We're the only ones that have won. That said, I do agree with your statement of Winnipeg and Toronto could probably offer him you're playing right here.
Elliot Friedman throughout Anaheim, and that makes so much sense to me, that it kind of emerged as the top of my list of potential landing spots for him. I just feel like the position that they're at, their window, they can take a little bit more of that gamble, and then the value add of the presence of a leader and a Stanley Cup champion like that makes a lot of sense for a young core in Anaheim.
Not to mention, if he comes out and has a really good start to the year, that's a piece you could flip at the deadline if you're the Ducks, if you're purely in it for the asset management and not like what he can provide to the group leadership wise.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I think that makes a lot of sense for a team like Anaheim. And honestly, not to oversell us, but we're actually going to talk about it a little bit at the end. If you're Jonathan Toews as well, trying to get back into hockey, having to live in Southern California may be a nice, comfortable way of easing yourself back into the lifestyle.
I've just heard, I don't want to speculate on this. I've just heard weird things about some of the holistic approaches he's taken in his rehabilitation. And I'm not judging that. I love a holistic approach. I've just heard very Coachella, Burning Man vibes, which might actually be perfect in Anaheim for Jonathan Toews. So
might just nail it. But if you are, if your center depth chart is looking anything like McKinnon, Nelson, Coyle, Drury, Jonathan Toews, I think you feel excellent about that. Even if it's just 4 of those names, you feel very good about it. Really?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm sold on it.
Well, I'm just saying any 4 of those names. It could even be the current 4.
No, current 4, cool. Current 4, cool. Jonathan Toews is such a gamble, and I just feel like the Avs have taken so many gambles, to include a Brock Nelson, right? Like, they just need some of these bets to hit before I feel comfortable with them casting some more
spells.
I do feel like somebody cast some spells on the Colorado Avalanche. In looking at these playoffs, look, again, we said it, I don't think they were going to get through Florida in a Stanley Cup final.
Yeah.
But I still look at some of these teams and the path that Dallas took before they were ousted, and I just feel, they deserved a better fate.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into that, but let's touch just quickly on Ilya Nabokov.
Perfect.
The Avs second round pick from last year. One of the top goaltenders coming out of the KHL, not this past season, but the season before, was their playoff MVP, the equivalent of their Conn Smythe, as they won the Gargan Cup. Megan, this is a prospect the Avs are really, really high on. Inks his 2-year ELC. Big shout out to our guy, Evan Rowell. He had it first the day before it officially broke. And Evan has also reported and then was confirmed today by Ilya Nabokov on his own Instagram. He will be staying in the KHL for 1 year, but as soon as this season is done, he is coming over to North America and will likely head straight to Loveland for their end of season and playoff push. This is a goaltender that the Avs are high on, considered to be one of the better goaltenders not currently playing in the NHL.
Yeah, I like the approach they've taken with Nabokov too. He's a little bit older compared to other goalies, drafted in their first draft year eligibility. And when you look around the league at young goaltenders and their trajectory to the NHL, you're looking at, on average, around 3 seasons in the American League. You look at Jesper Wallstedt, and he's 3 seasons in the American League, a former first-round pick from 2021. Askarov, another intriguing one, right?
Yeah.
Like, you look at the position that San Jose was in bringing in Georgiev ahead of giving Askarov the starter's net because of how important it is not to rush your young goaltenders to the NHL too soon. So he's also a first-round pick 2020, sitting at about 3 seasons in the American League, with this last one being split a lot more between the NHL and, going back to players like Dustin Wolf and Lukas Dostal, similar trajectory, and those are goalies that were vying for the starters net like more immediately out the gate. I think Nabokov is probably going to not immediately assume the starters net. His path to the NHL, one, is probably going to be at least 2 years in the American League. Yep. And that's probably why then with this 2-year ELC, that first year on loan in the KHL, just because you want to guarantee him as many starts in the American League as possible, make it worth his while when he does finally make that transition to North America with a clear line to the NHL. And so it does kind of line up with Mackenzie Blackwood, with the idea being Nabokov can back up in the NHL in around 2 years' time.
Yeah, I think it's, I even, you just listed off a few goalies there. I even think of Pavel Francouz a little bit.
Yeah, he's a good example because he was older.
Right. And KHL's, he was the MVG, they call it over there, I believe 2 years in a row, Pavel Francouz, before coming over. And even then, he did the full year with the Eagles, a year where it was up and down a bit, and then he was the backup. And you and I have talked about it many times. I do think Pavel Francouz, part of what, one, he's one of my favorite people I've met doing this job. And two, I really did think that he had starter potential. I'm not going to go as far as to say, I think he would have been, a Vezina caliber guy. I thought he had starter potential. There were teams that were willing to pay him to come in and be a 1A. And then he just had a crazy string of bad injury luck and career's done and all that. But I think Francouz is a good thing to, keep in mind when you're talking about how might this go. Play a year in the KHL. He'll come in, split some time with Trent Miner as the Eagles season comes to an end and they hit that playoff push. Next year, so 26, 27, It's likely that he's the full-time AHL starter, gets the bulk of those games. Then you probably go into another year where he's on a new contract. There's probably still the majority of his games are AHL with some NHL call-up. So that gets us through 3 seasons. Then you probably are talking full-time backup. And then in that 5th year of Mackenzie Blackwood's deal, you're probably, again, assuming everything goes as is projected and Nabokov continues to get better and grows into that goalie the Avs think he can be, you're probably talking a bit of a competition in Blackwood's final year. So to your point, yes, you did just sign Mackenzie Blackwood to a fresh 5-year deal, but the 2-year ELC for Nabokov really does start to line up well when you actually start to map it out of how the Avs would ideally like for this to go. Yeah, you can kind of sit there and be like, yep, 4, 5, and right at 5, he's competing. And in year 6, that's probably his net.
This would be an area of the Avs development or an area of the lineup too that I'd like to see them fill internally, because they've given up so much draft capital, especially to solve goaltending through this point, that you'd just love to see it hit internally and not have to give up so much to solve the goaltending position in the future. I love the direction they're taking with Mackenzie Blackwood. I feel the most confident about goaltending than I have in a long while.
I'm with you.
Going back to, I felt a comfort with, a Pavel Francouz kind of as the backup and a Kemper, or, year 1 Georgiev. It really soured quickly, you guys.
Honeymoon phase ended quickly. I was going to look up. Do you know off the top of your head how old Nabokov is?
22.
Right, he's 22 right now. So, yeah, you're talking about, can he be ready to take over in his year 27?
That's Mackenzie Blackwood age.
Right.
It's young for goalies, and it's right around the time where you start wondering, is it this guy a starter or not?
Right.
With time to prove.
With time to prove. So, again, 5 years out, that feels like a long time for sure. But that's about what it takes. Once you get to this stage of development for a goalie, that's about what it's probably going to take for him to get there. And I think you calling out Askarov earlier is a great example. Askarov has been like the next guy for how long now? And people still feel that way because he still continues to play at a really high level in the American League. And when he comes up, he shows well, but this is just, it's a delicate process. And I think the Avs are starting it with Nabokov based on what he put out on Instagram today. I think he's bought into this kind of projection. I think he sees that, hey, he's probably got a goal for himself. I'd like to be 28 and be the starter for the Colorado Avalanche. And so, I think it lines up well. At that point, you're talking Blackwood is into his mid-30s. And yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Nabokov is a really, really, exciting prospect for the Avs. The Avs don't have many of those right now. He's one of the top goalies in the KHL. And like you said, this would just be a huge organizational win for them to draft and develop a goaltender that has number 1 upside.
And I know that's easier said than done, but there's only one way to do it. You got to start somewhere.
But you got to do it eventually.
Yeah,
right?
You got to start somewhere.
Like the last time they did something even remotely close to that was David Abisher. And that's like early 2000s. I think he got traded in like 2000. Geez, it wasn't pre-lockout, was it? 2004? Oh, that would be upsetting. Anyways, you've got Blackwood and Wedgwood for this year. If you want to give Wedgwood a little extension,
I love that idea.
2 years?
Yeah.
Great.
I love that.
Keep your tandem together for the next couple seasons. You would not hear any argument from me on getting Scott Wedgwood extended. Anything else on Nabokov, Megan?
No.
All right. All stuff that we're keeping an eye on with the Avs. We'll be keeping an eye on everything with Brock Nelson, what the Avs are thinking there. And then it does sound like we are going to get to see Ilya Nabokov at development and training camp. So that's huge. So before he goes back on loan to the KHL, we're going to get a look at him up close and personal. We'll be keeping you guys locked in.
Yeah.
With all of that.
I think that's going to be 4 weeks from now.
Yeah, not far out at all.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled. Dev Camp's right around the corner.
Right around the corner. Really looking forward to it. Megan, there's still hockey going on, though. And we've got a rematch of last year's Stanley Cup Final. It's the Oilers. It's the Panthers. I'm excited for this series. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. This Panthers team is one of the best teams that I've seen probably since the 2022 Avs. And this Oilers team has their offense going maybe unlike any other team I've seen in the postseason. It's just not hard for them to score. Do you have any initial thoughts or predictions before we delve into this a little bit more? Knowing that, no Zach Hyman for the Edmonton Oilers, which is just such a bummer.
It is such a bummer. I was trying to think.
Especially because Mason Marchment was just out there losing his fucking mind.
Mason Marchment. You see frustration within the Dallas fan base too over this player. Just, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. Like what he brings, the menacing, annoying player, just didn't really add enough value at the end of the day. They needed more production and they needed more high skill.
Before we get into the Cup Final, let's unpack this, because our last show was before Game 5 where the Stars were eliminated, and you and I were trying to tiptoe around a little bit of it. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze on a lot of these players for the Dallas Stars.
No.
Starting with Mason Marchment, starting with Jamie Benn. Everything that we heard touted about that team and the depth and how hard they were to play against and coming at you in waves just dried up and disappeared.
Matt Duchene, a goal and 5 assists, all 6 points on the power play. No 5v5 contributions. That's kind of ridiculous.
That's crazy.
And so I see that come up as a name, like, oh, should the Avs take a swing at Matt Duchene for a second line center? And I'll put a pin in that for a second, because I look at this and I'm scared. I just watched the Avs not get enough contributions from their star players in that first round series, and it cost them in a big way. And I just don't know that they can take that gamble then on a player who now has a track record of not showing up when it's most needed in playoffs. And it's frustrating because from the Avs perspective, he has shown up against the Avs in the playoffs very specifically, but over the entire course of a playoff run, it hasn't been enough. And I'm singling out Matt Duchene, but this is obviously bigger. I look at a player like Jason Robertson, who missed so much time, and the contributions came in the final 3 games, but they needed a little bit more from him. And he's probably not at 100% coming back, so I'll grant him some allowances. But I look at the costly and untimely penalties of Jamie Benn, and I see the frustration it brewed within the Dallas fan base specifically. So I know, just as an outsider, that I'm not making something out of nothing there. There's a concern around discipline and reading that moment, right? When a leader is truly needed, that discipline is necessary. It's a non-negotiable. And so to put your team at a disadvantage is tough, because I have a side note about this, but that Dallas PK wasn't infallible.
No.
And I look at how Edmonton solved it in ways that the Avs could have, and it frustrates me. But putting your team then down on against really great power plays later over these playoffs, it is a big deal. It is a big deal against an Edmonton team that feasts on their power play. So anyways, Jamie Benn lets them down a little bit. Matt Duchene lets them down. Mikko Rantanen's contributions are weird because they were timely. But it wasn't enough across the board. And I think individually he did a lot more than the others. So he's still probably a player.
He got them out of a round.
Yeah. And honestly, like the start to that Winnipeg series, I think set the tone in a really important way. So I won't say it was untimely. Like he did contribute at important moments, but obviously as the playoffs get deeper, the matchups get harder and harder. The goals become harder to come by. Like I thought Pete DeBoer's comments, just in lots of comments, but he talked about his team as being perceived as a rush team, but he himself wasn't describing them as such, talking about these rush chances that they get drying up and then relying on goaltending more. And I thought this was weird that he described them as more so like being perceived as a rush team rather than actually being one. But it did seem true. Like,
they led the league in controlled zone entries this year.
well, it just felt like in the playoffs, though, those rush chances are harder to come by, and it kind of proved who really is a rush team and who isn't, because being able to create those opportunities, capitalize on them, just so much harder in the playoffs. And I think it revealed that as a weakness of the team. And then physicality, interestingly enough, you hear the kind of feedback coming out of this exit that they need to get bigger. They need to get tougher to play against. Because I know this was maybe a criticism of the Avs coming out of the Avs Dallas series that the Avs were too soft. I don't think so. Avs finished 7th in hits per 60, Dallas dead last. It really exposed a lot of weaknesses in Dallas in how they exited these playoffs.
Well, and just real quick on Mikko Rantanen, I believe I saw it was 17 of his points came within a 5-game stretch. 17 of his 22 points came within a 5-game stretch. And then just the part that's so weird. I mean, Mikko Rantanen went on an all-time playoff heater. An all-time playoff heater. Had an all-time performance in Game 7 against the Avs. And ended the playoffs, Megan, by setting a new personal worst, going 8 games without a goal in the playoffs. His previous career long had been 7 games. He finishes the playoffs on a longer playoff goal drought than he had ever had in his career. So just interesting the kind of, just polarization there between the different types of Mikko Rantanen that Dallas got in the playoffs. And yeah, I just felt like they got, like, so many things went right for them for the first half of this playoff run. Yes, they had some weird bounces that went against them, as all teams do, but they got the timely goal every time they needed it. They got the power play right when they most could have benefited from it. The puck bounced their favor at the right moment. And it just felt like you and I were talking about it quietly behind the scenes, because we didn't want to come out and make it seem like it was, we're just trying to find reasons to dunk on the Stars. But these cracks in their armor were showing all the way back in round 1. And you mentioned Jason Robertson. Even though he got going probably a little bit, too little, too late, he ended up becoming their only goal scorer for 3 straight games.
Yes.
There was, if it was for a while, it was, if it wasn't coming in the power play, we're not scoring. Then it was, if it wasn't coming from Mikko Rantanen, we're not scoring. Then it went back to, if we're not on the power play, we're not scoring. And it ended with, if it's not Jason Robertson, we're not scoring. And it was just shifting from one part of the lineup to the next. There was never, more than one line getting in on it. Even strength. They were terrible at 5-on-5 all playoffs. They got caved in by the Avs at 5-on-5. They got beat pretty bad at 5-on-5 by the Jets. And again, caved in by the Oilers at 5-on-5 in the Western Conference Final. Like, this all, when the way that it ended, to your point, we were all looking back on it like, yeah, we should have seen this coming. It was part of the reason why it felt so disappointing for the Avs. They did so many good things.
That's why it felt fated that the Dallas Stars were supposed to win it all, because so much lined up in their favor to bring them to this point. It wasn't necessarily superior hockey that was elevating them. It was a lot of luck.
Yeah.
And some good goaltending, which is what makes Pete DeBoer's comments so frustrating.
Yep.
I just wanted to read the stat line out really quick. Dallas.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, 45 goals, 17 on the power play, 9 from Mikko Rantanen, 6 of those, being the hat trick game. So just 3 goals outside of that. And then 3 empty net goals. No big deal.
Right. Read those totals again.
45 goals.
Yeah.
17 on the power play. 9 goals from Mikko Rantanen.
That's insane. You and I were texting each other as those games were going on, like they're continuing to live and die by this power play. I did not realize to that extent.
Yeah, it really carried.
Jeez. And so that means 9 goals total across 3 rounds that didn't come on the power play or off the stick of Mikko Rantanen, right? If I did that quick, because you said 45 total.
Yeah.
Or wait, so I'm sorry. 19. Right? Because you said 17 plus 9.
Mm-hmm.
So be 26. So 19 goals total. That's crazy. That is crazy. Across 3 rounds of playoffs.
And a lot of Pete DeBoer's comments, so interesting, but he pointed back to the end of the year struggles that you saw. Everybody saw. They weren't even generating shots on net. They were struggling to convert, and there was this concern, like, has Mikko Rantanen had enough time? This just isn't gelling, this top 6. It's not creating real opportunities. They're not even putting pucks on net. And so he kind of referred back to that, how, yeah, that ended up being more of a problem. And then the other thing, oh shoot, I just drew a blank on what the other thing was, but it was something Pete DeBoer said in the post-game media unpack.
Well, while you think
that was super interesting.
While you think about that, throw up that comment from Alyssa. This was the other part of it too, because Mikko really did he got bottled up pretty good in that Edmonton series. Not very threatening. Again, the goal issue with him went back to the previous round. And I do think at a certain point, this is accurate. And it was always the McKinnon Merchant thing I thought was so ridiculous and unfair for how good Mikko Rantanen is. But this has always kind of been the part of it, right? Can you go be the guy that, we heard Pete DeBoer say we're spending 80% of our time pre-scouting Cale Makar and Nathan McKinnon. Can Mikko Rantanen go be the guy that 80% of another team's pre-scout is built around? And again, I want to be clear with what I'm saying. I think extremely highly of Mikko Rantanen. I think he's an elite goal scorer and playmaker. But I don't think people fully understand the concept of being like, there's not many players that can be effective when they're game planned for that much. Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon. We even saw Cale Makar struggle with it in these playoffs. Like, it's a hard thing to be that keyed in on and still find a way to create. And I think Mikko Rantanen was met with nobody else is going, and they have 4 guys watching me all the time. How do we get out of this? And when you're living off your goaltender, it just makes it shocking for your coach to come out after all of it and essentially say, like, yep, goalie sucks. Nothing we can do.
It's crazy to me. I can't draw up a justification for it. I only see negative. And I understand behind the scenes, like, Ottinger's dealing with an upper respiratory thing. And so they're already considering resting him. And with that context, okay, maybe it's a little less personal, but his comments immediately contradict that.
Right.
By making it a performance issue. And we talked about, the mistakes of Monty with Swayman and Ullmark in the Boston round 1 a couple years back, and how that cost them, because you don't do that to your goalies, really. You have to be committed, and it really affects their morale, their confidence. And he has this track record, right, of doing this with goaltenders. And Ottinger has said all of the right things at the other side of this, but I don't see how you come back from that with relationship. Because, the other thing I've seen is it wasn't supposed to be as pointed at Ottinger's performance, but rather to wake up the team for that start. And I would be willing to buy into that if it weren't for the comments that immediately pointed to the performance and basically the track record, the body of work that DeBoer is referencing, and feeling a confidence of running with Casey DeSmith. Like, okay, I'm not his body of work points to less success through this point. But what I imagine too is, all right, you run the risk of, you want to jolt your team. Sure, like they're clearly making mistakes, but also, what does that say about their own confidence in their chances when you've just taken their starting goaltender and their best chance out of the game.
Right.
Yeah, you want to jolt them awake. They're culpable for those first 2 goals. There's mistakes that get made. A young player takes a penalty, blah, blah, blah. But you also probably don't just hurt then the relationship of Ottinger to DeBoer, but your players trust in you making that decision in that moment. Because I doubt if you went around the room and polled who they felt the most confidence in to win that game, they were going to say DeSmith.
Ottinger?
No, like
who,
like if they're going to say who they have the most faith in to win that game, they're not going to say Casey DeSmith.
Okay, I'm sorry. Right. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. No, you're 100% correct. And were you watching the game live?
Yeah.
When they said we're gonna have a goalie change here, Meghan, my jaw literally like I just sat there like you're kidding me. You're down by 2, 7 minutes in. Not only did you just burn a timeout, because like call the timeout and use that. Hey, I just burned a timeout 7 minutes into this game. Wake the hell up.
Right.
To do that, then pull Jake Ottinger. And I'm with you. So here's where I struggled with it. I completely understand the trying to wake the team up. Completely get it. To me, in that situation, you're down 2-0, 7 minutes in, and your team's kind of asleep. You pull the goalie to wake everyone up in January. You do that in December. Or, whatever. When they were coming down the stretch and Dallas was playing really poorly, had he pulled Jake Ottinger 7 minutes into one of those games? Sure. This is an elimination game in the Western Conference Final. Jake Ottinger is probably the biggest reason why your team is even in that game.
Yes. He was lights out 2 rounds.
Right. And for you to pull him and then end up losing 5-3. I honestly, Meghan, I was half expecting that we were going to see DeBoer fired within 48 hours of that loss. Because that's a move that if you make that, and I honestly think that he was setting himself up for a headache either way. Because had Casey DeSmith won that game, then what do you do? Then are you starting Casey DeSmith in game 6? And suddenly it's not. But anyways, all of this, I could have, hey, I was trying to get the team going. There was nothing else I could do. But for then him to come out and even reference the 2 goals against as why one of the reasons, 2 goals on 2 shots. He's lost 6 of 7 games against the Oilers. It's like, this sounds like you are putting it on Jake Ottinger. You started this by saying, I didn't pin it all on Jake. And then you went and listed like 4 different things where you were pinning them on Jake. And I just, like you said, Meghan, the confidence of the players in Pete DeBoer now having a bit of a track record of not handling his goalies very well. I could not believe what I was watching.
No, and as we're sitting here talking about the glaring issue of Dallas's offense drying up and there being a bigger issue that stems back into the regular season as they were going down the stretch and they were struggling to create, then you're seeing a bigger picture issue here that just bled over into the playoffs that went unresolved rather than goaltending, which elevated in the playoffs. Round 1, round 2, great from Ottinger. It just feels crummy then that he's out in press conferences leaning on, people have this perception of us as a rush team, but the rush chances dried up, and that's when you defer to goaltending. It's like, this isn't about goaltending.
Right.
You get that, right, Pete DeBoer? and he talked about, all these changes he made to the power play units and putting Maverick Bourque, the young player, and sitting an experienced veteran to make these moves. And so there's desperation going into this game for Dallas. It's obvious, like, this was always bigger than goaltending. So why is that kind of what it seems to be what you're leading with?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just super defensive of Jake Ottinger right now, but there are so many other issues here than the goaltending. And if anything, like you said, the goaltending was the only reason they made it to a conference final.
Yeah. They don't make it out of round 1 without Jake Ottinger playing I mean, as it all shook out, exactly at the level that he played at over 7 games, they had very little room for error there. All right, we're running a little bit long here, so I'm sure we'll have plenty more to talk about with the Stanley Cup Final. But you looking forward to a rematch of last year?
Yeah. Not only is this Florida team, I agree with the comments. It's the best team he's probably ever coached.
Paul Maurice.
Maurice. But Edmonton's different too.
Mhm.
This is a different Edmonton team than they saw last year, and I'm excited for it. We were talking about Zach Hyman and the loss of Zach Hyman, and then we went off on a Dallas tangent. And I just wanted to compare this loss to what Arturi Lehkonen means to the Avs.
Mhm.
I feel Hyman plays a similar role. He is such a warrior for them on the ice, and so the scoring maybe isn't going to impress you the way that Draisaitl and McDavid do, but he is such a responsible player and he battles so much for them that this is a huge loss. And I just wanted to say that I really like Zach Hyman as a player, and I'm sad that I won't get to see him in the Stanley Cup Final, but I still feel this team is built different. I think the back end is what impressed me the most in the absence of the player that I think is most defensively responsible for much of these playoffs in Matthias Ekholm. I've seen Evan Bouchard take a big step forward, and I just think they're so much more well-rounded on the back end, and they've gotten good goaltending from Skinner when they've needed it. You know, like it's been shaky going back to earlier rounds, but he seems dialed in right now. So all the other parts of Edmonton that have always been good continue to be good. I think it will be a more exciting Stanley Cup Final than, well, last year it was exciting too.
Yeah,
but it just feels it definitely has the potential to go 7, and it feels like it's going to just be 2 heavyweights going at it the whole time.
Yeah, my only thing with this, I agree with everything you just said about the Oilers. I do wonder and worry for the Oilers that the Florida Panthers might just be that good that it's not going to matter.
Right, because they also took a step forward.
Yeah,
and
somehow.
The addition of Seth Jones to their back end is just an added threat. And then the contributions that they get from all of their lineup is really hard to compete with when you start to talk about depth. And I still think they have a decor that I think everyone should emulate. And they've, in adding Seth Jones, just made it that much better. So, and the goaltending's just been pretty steady. But I think the experience that Florida has and just how connected they are playing, you know, the 5-man unit I talk about playing shift by shift, so connected with one another, that's going to be hard for Edmonton to contend with. And then you lose a player like Zach Hyman. That's where, side by side, I still think Florida has an edge in this series.
Yeah, Florida's my pick. I don't know in how many games, because I'm with you. I think this has the potential to be just an outstanding knock him down, drag him out type series. And I'm really looking forward to watching it. I think it's gonna be a ton of fun. Any other thoughts on it? Just, you know, like I said, I know we haven't even had media day yet, so we'll have plenty more to unpack for this final. But any other thoughts?
No, there's one thing I wanted to say on the Dallas series. I also don't know if we've talked about how facing the Avs in the first round had an influence over Dallas in rounds 2 and then in the conference final. I think the Avs forcing 7 and making it such a physical matchup that was so hard fought wore Dallas down in round 1 in a way that caught up to them by the Western Conference Final, that I want to give it some credit. I'm not trying to put lipstick on a pig. This still hurts the way that the Avs exited the playoffs this year, but I don't think we give them enough credit for just how challenging of a series that was and the toll that it took on Dallas.
Well, Megan, so I said to you, because the last 2 years, what we've seen from the last 2 years that the Stars have eliminated the Avs before this one. So last season and then 2020 in the bubble. What's been frustrating, if you're the Avs, is you've watched Dallas eliminate you and then go on, whether it be the next round or now 2 rounds later, just completely turn back into a pumpkin and become a pretty unimpressive team that ends up kind of going out on a whimper. Like, we all watched that first round series. And again, I mentioned this to you, not because, you know, what he says at the end all be all, but because he's been around for a long time. Pierre LeBrun covered that series with us. And he told us on multiple occasions, and then he tweeted out after, this is a top 5 all-time playoff series for me. Like, just the way that these, like, talk about heavyweights trading blows and all that. And you sit there and you're like, wow, these are two teams that are poised to go the distance. And then on all 3 occasions, the Dallas Stars just peter out, losing 5 games without really much of a fight. And I think what you're talking about, I've made the joke for several seasons now that Dallas is the NHL's best over 35 team. And now this season, they got a little bit younger with Wyatt Johnston, and now even adding Mikko Rantanen back in. You have Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz. Like, all right, they're not solely relying on Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, Joe Pavelski, Matt Duchene anymore. But relative to what you're talking about, that was a long, brutal series with the Avs that went 7 games.
It was.
That was a physical series that went 6 games with the Winnipeg Jets. And I think you saw the Jamie Benns, Tyler Seguin, Matt Duchene of that Dallas Stars team just run out of gas. Mason Marchment was intentionally trying to hit everything that moved for 3 rounds. Ran out of gas.
And he was just trying to keep up with the teams he was playing. When I talked about the top teams hits per 60, Florida's number 1. You believe that instantly, right? That's just the type of hockey that they play. But Winnipeg ahead of the Avs, even in that, right? So you're right. Both heavy physical series that maybe don't get credit that tired Dallas out. And then I remembered the other Pete DeBoer thing. And it was talking about game by game playing at a deficit for so much of these playoffs. We obviously know that to be true within the Avs series, but it caught up with them in a big way that they were behind the 8 ball a lot. And anything you know about hockey and the jargon, get pucks deep, process, if you're playing behind, you're not doing the right things.
Yeah.
And so when you're consistently playing from behind, you're not doing the right things. And eventually it caught up with them, because usually you get rewarded for doing the right things. In the Avs, that was what was so frustrating, is they were doing a lot of the right things in this series and they weren't rewarded at the end of the day. And there's lots of learning lessons for the Avs going into next year, but it finally caught up with Dallas. And playing from behind, it pointed to some things within their process that just weren't quite right, and it finally cost them.
There's one question I want to ask you about this Stanley Cup Final matchup, and the question, I guess, doesn't change what our final topic of the day is going to be, but you and I were discussing this over the weekend. The Avs had beat Dallas in that Game 7. Do you think that are you and I in Florida right now getting ready for Media Day tomorrow because it's Avs Panthers? Or do you think that Edmonton still would have beat Colorado? And then I'll ask you if you think the Avs could have beat the Panthers, but I think I know our answers to that. So I do. I think the Avs would have beat the Oilers and gone on to the Stanley Cup Final. What do you think?
I think they could have, but it's more of a coin flip, honestly, because the Avs had some spooky scaries to shake off in that first round, like not being able to convert on the power play. There were things they could have done that I saw proof of concept with Edmonton. They have the skill and the talent to do a little bit more to convert on the man advantage. And they were just getting beat along the wall, and they weren't moving enough and not moving the puck through traffic enough, despite having skaters with the skill set to do it. So anyways, I think that because Edmonton has some of that offensive firepower and they clearly had it figured out, it's more of a coin flip in the Western Conference Final. But I also think some of these things, like players like Cal McCarr being held back, would have started to break free. And I think Brock Nelson would have come alive playing with Gabriel Landeskog for more time. And the Charlie Coyle we saw in these playoffs was not the Charlie Coyle one that usually, he has so much more postseason experience, and in the regular season even was a different player, that I think that third line would have had better results too. So I just think more things would have clicked for the Avs if they had advanced further. And so the coin flip of the Western Conference Final and then the Stanley Cup Final, if they did make it through Edmonton, which I think they could have, is it goes back to everything we're saying about how well constructed Florida is. I think that would have been very, very hard to beat.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm not gonna say, because we're talking about a complete hypothetical. So I'm not gonna say no, they could not have beaten the Panthers. I'm just looking at the way that Florida is playing right now, and I'm just I don't know who can beat them.
It's their game time players are being game time players, but also everybody. They're getting contributions from everybody. And so that's what would have needed to click into place for the Avs. And that's so hard to have everybody hit like that.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. Last thing I want to talk to you about, Megan, it relates to Florida. 6 straight years with a team representing Florida in the Stanley Cup Final. 9, including this year, 9 of the last 11 Stanley Cup Finals have featured a team from a no state tax state. Either Dallas, Florida, Nashville, I guess that's Tennessee, or Nevada. Arizona was the other one, no longer there. Seattle is another one. 9 of the last 11 years have featured a team in the Stanley Cup Final from a no state tax state. Now, and you're going to get a sense of where I'm at on all this, nobody was complaining about an unfair advantage for the years and years and years when those teams toiled in the bottom of the standings and everyone in big markets made fun of them and said they need to move. Hockey doesn't belong there. There's no fans in the building. And now a lot of those same people are saying, well, hey, no, hold on. It's not fair. They have an unfair advantage. Their weather's nice. It's a great place to live and you don't pay any state tax. The league needs to do something about this. Where are you at with the no state tax advantage?
I'm in a bit of a wait and see because it's obvious there's a pattern here in the benefits. And it's tough too. It kind of hurts the Avs in ways. I have felt like when you look at a quality of life perspective, Colorado seems like it should be a top destination. And then I always find myself a little surprised that there are guys that they've tried to go out and get that ultimately don't come here and choose another place. And I look at like a Claude Giroux and his interest in Florida over Colorado, though that was a name that they would have had interest in. And I'm like, well, the quality of life's great here. The weather's great here. And so I default a little bit to some of the advantages of a no tax state because I do look at the family planning aspect of players in evaluating the years of earning potential that they have in this league. And I think the average is probably pretty low. I'm going to say around 9. I could be wrong about that. And so you want to maximize then the money that you're taking home in the short window of opportunity that you're able to make this money. And look, it's not small money. I'm not going to pretend it's not, but you want to maximize your earning potential then in the years that you're playing. And so some small advantage then like a no tax state that also happens to have wonderful weather. It makes a lot of sense than why it would appeal to players. Because I even look at the conversation around Sam Bennett and it's like stay in Florida or potentially Toronto. And so I feel like I do see that counter argument of players considering going back somewhere that feels more like home, a Canadian market, and then the no tax state. And it's just kind of always though in the conversation of what players are weighing. And because these teams like a Florida or even a Toronto that I thought was going to put up more of a fight in the matchup earlier, these playoffs, they're also competitive right now. Vegas has been competitive too. And so there's appeal in quality of life. Cost of living, I think, varies from place to place. And then where the team is at in terms of their window. And I think they relate to each other. Like I think players being incentivized to go to the no tax state and signing deals like Sam Reinhart's deal, comparatively what he brings in because of the no tax state, like compared to like a Willie Nylander in Toronto, is enough to bring in another depth roster player in Florida that Toronto doesn't have the money to add. And so that does start to make a difference that I feel like give me the next 5 years and let's see how this plays out, because I think the parity in the league still exists. But as someone who's seen players turn away Colorado and I don't fully understand it, I'm starting to understand it.
Well, and when you're talking about like it's not a small amount of money either, let's just use Mikko Rantanen as an example. Texas, a no state tax state. And again, I'm gonna play a bit of a what if game here. Let's just say he had signed the identical deal in Colorado, just for comparison's sake. $12 million per year, 8 years. The difference it breaks out to is just shy of about $1 million a year in what Mikko Rantanen puts into his pocket by signing with Dallas versus signing in Colorado. So If you're the Avalanche and, you know, if you're in that situation where you're negotiating and there's other teams involved, the Avs would have had to offer Mikko Rantanen $13 million a year for 8 years to match the amount of take-home money that he's making in Dallas for what is $1 million less on the salary cap. So, you know, $1 million on the cap, maybe not a huge difference, but just as an example, like, yeah, the Avs would have had to change their offer by $1 million and make him the highest paid player on the team above Nathan MacKinnon for him to have that same take home. And I'm just using that as the example because that's a recent example. But yeah, there's those situations that are playing out all over the place. And I don't know. I do just look at it as in the same way that for years, decades, some of these Canadian market teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs, like the Montreal Canadiens, and their fan bases have, again, made the arguments flying in the face of Florida Panther fans and Arizona Coyote fans and Nashville Predator fans of why would any player want to go play there when you can come here in front of a packed building every night? The city loves you. You're a hero in Toronto. It's like, yeah, or you're a kid who grew up in Canada and now you can play in the NHL. You can play for a good team in a place that's warm weather during the cold months, which is when the hockey season takes place. They're nice places to live. You can go out into public and live a semi-normal life. And, oh, by the way, you're going to make a bunch more money here. Who would not, like, if you're a player, it's like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that. To me, it's the same. Every state, every team has their recruiting tools. It's another recruiting tool. If you've got a GM who's willing to be aggressive and leverage the fact that you're a no tax state, good for you. You should be able to. And I just think it's a little funny now that we see just so much of a script flip from all these people who made fun of these Sunbelt states for years and years, now saying that they're too good and it's an unfair advantage.
Yeah, because it's interesting, right? Like you look at the teams that are good and have the no state tax. And so I'd put Vegas.
Yep.
I'll put Dallas in there.
Yep.
And then I'll do Tampa and Florida,
Yep.
right? And so then you've got Nashville and Seattle also hanging out here. But you look at Chandler Stevenson and Brendan Montour signing big contracts in Seattle, and it starts to feel like it's no coincidence that they go from no tax places to just another no tax place. Like, okay, maybe they're not as competitive. So what would interest them in Seattle, do you think? And it starts to feel all interconnected. It's definitely no coincidence. It helps that the other teams that I just mentioned ahead of it also are in competitive places, but even the ones that aren't still hold appeal for players trying to maximize like one of probably their last NHL contracts.
Right.
In a no state tax place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's fascinating. And truthfully, I'm of the opinion that I don't like, there's nothing for the league to do about it, at least as of right now. If it gets to a place where it's egregious as like the cap continues to go up and there does become a clear advantage. Okay. Maybe it's something that you can look at as a way to level set stuff, but, I just think it's been an interesting discourse over the last couple of weeks because there's a bit of a run here. And, I do look at Florida, I look at Tampa, and I look at Vegas, and I say, are we looking at 3 teams that are going to start to become rebuild proof? There's Mitch Marner. The report's already out there. His top 2 teams, the Florida Panthers, the Vegas Golden Knights. Yeah, they're both good. Yeah, they're both warm weather cities. There's one other thing that they have in common, coming from one of the markets that has one of the highest tax rates, not a state, but one of the highest tax rates in Toronto. If you got an ownership and a management that's willing to be aggressive about it, teams like Florida, Vegas, Tampa may be kind of, resilient to the normal ebbs and flows of an NHL organization. They might be able to just stay pretty good all the time.
Yeah, I can see that then being why like Steven Stamkos probably felt hurt by the way his time in Tampa comes to an end, and he goes to another no steam tax
I
place.
didn't even put that together until you just started saying it. Yeah.
Nashville.
Interesting.
Very interesting. But yeah, I imagine that hurt then. Like, what do you mean? You guys are capable of this more than anybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
This is interesting. Now that you listed off the first two and we just both kind of arrived there with Stamkos, this might need to be a Pucks and Prosecco investigates.
Yeah, this actually, because like just Stevenson, Montar off the top of my head. I'm like, yeah, they came from no tax place. Oh, so did Steven Stamkos.
Marchessault. Another one. Vegas to Nashville.
Wow.
Matt Duchene. Nashville to Dallas. Interesting.
Wow.
This is interesting.
This is really interesting.
Well, let's put a pin in that, but let's revisit that this summer.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it.
That's going to do it here. We ran a little bit long today, but thank you guys for hanging out. Yeah, there's the drama is starting to unfold. We're heading towards the Stanley Cup Final. And then we're going to get into the off season. We're going to have the draft, like Megan said. Then it's development camp. So we are in the off season, but we are definitely still in the craziness of the off season. I think we did have a super chat actually before we get out of here. Yep. Boom. Super chat $1.99. $1.99 from Hurricane. Speaking of the mild, any interest in Marco Rossi?
So yeah, but the problem, like the reason Minnesota is in this place is because there's a difference of opinion and value.
Yep.
And I'm all for players being advocates for themselves and their value. And so if it's too rich for Minnesota's blood, it's going to be too rich. 23 years old, it's going to be too rich for the Avs to take a swing at another young player like, Casey Middlestat, like even more risk. So I just don't know that it would make sense. But if that number somehow did make sense and whatever this difference in opinion and value is so different, but still agreeable for the Avs, sure, why not? It's just,
it would also probably cost a pretty good amount to get him out of a division rival. And then you're dealing with the issue of you're sending picks and players and stuff like that to a team that you're going to have to go through.
I just don't know that I want to take a swing at a young centerman at this stage in the Avs place. It's like, even around the Cal Ritchie conversation, realistically, where is Cal Ritchie plugging into the Avs lineup this year? It wouldn't have been second line centerman role. And that isn't where they need a 23-year-old center right now, is where they'd have room available for him. Yeah. I said that so bad. I'm sorry.
That's going to do it here. Big shout out to Hurricane, $1.99. Yeah, that's going to do it. We'll be back at it. Pucks and Prosecco tomorrow. And then the off season rolls on. We got more content coming your guys' way all summer long as we head towards the draft. She's Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. We got Chloe Thiel behind the glass today. She'll be back sitting right here tomorrow with Megan for Pucks and Prosecco. Thanks so much, everybody. Stay dry out there. If you're here in Colorado, sounds like we got a big rainstorm coming. Enjoy your evening. We'll see you tomorrow.